Happy Fitness Friday, everybody. Today I am here to share with you about one of the most popular forms of high intensity interval training, which is Tabata. So I'm excited to jump right in. As you guys are coming into this broadcast, please make sure you say hello, let me know where you're coming in from. If you don't know me, my name is Emily Sopo and I am a Myzone Master Trainer. My counterpart, Ayla Donlin, today is not here. If you watched last week's broadcast, you know that her husband, Nate, was doing the race across America, and he's supposed to finish today. So she is there watching him finish, so we can all wish Nate a great last few hours of his race across America. So I'm here solo today, and I'm really excited because Tabata is... Good morning, Stephen. Tabata is one of my personal forms of high-intensity interval training. Hey, Ayla. Hope you're doing well. Hey, Coach B. Thanks for joining in. Tabata is one of my favorite forms of high-intensity interval training, but it can be a little bit misunderstood. And so I wrote this blog post, good morning, I wrote this blog post, which is on myzone.org, all about Tabata so that you can understand where it came from. Hey, Sylvia, why we use it, what it's good for, and then also maybe some of the misconceptions around what Tabata looks like. As you're coming in, I would love for you to share this out. Again, this is all about Tabata today, so if you know anybody who would be interested in learning about this, please just write their name in the comment section below. And if you've tried Tabata, I want to know about it. Give me a little like emoji, hand raise, or thumbs up or something to let me know that you've tried Tabata before. If you want to learn more about Myzone, you can always check out myzone.org, where you can explore the blog that Ayla and I contribute to. You can also check out Myzone Moves on YouTube. Ooh, lots of Tabatas, I like it. On YouTube, the Myzone Moves YouTube channel, as well as Myzone on Instagram, Myzone on Facebook, and Myzone on all forms of social media. So let's hop right into Tabata. If you guys have any questions, I'll try to answer them. Hey, Melissa. I'll try to answer them if I see them, and if not, I'll go back after the broadcast to answer them as well. All right. So Tabata was named after Dr. Izumi Tabata, and I apologize if I say that name wrong. It was first researched in 1996, and it was a study out of the National Institute of Health and Nutrition in Japan. And so, according to the researchers, this form of training had been used for years by the Japanese speed skating team, and then it was studied in this particular body of research. So before we get into what this study looked like, because I think that's important for us to understand, I want to let you know up front that this form of Tabata that you often see used, or that you've probably used yourself, isn't actually Tabata in its original form. So it's a different version of Tabata, and I'll explain what that means here in just a second. So for simplicity's sake, I'm going to refer to the Tabata study as having two different groups, the steady state group and the HIT group. And I'll explain what that means as well. Before we hop into the actual studies, a couple quick definitions. Hey, Nicole, I owe you a text. Nicole, I'm gonna get back to you. There are two definitions that I want to talk about. The first is aerobic capacity. You've probably heard this term before if you've been going through our old Myzone resources that we've provided, but aerobic capacity, and this is a term that was used in the study, so I want everyone to know it up front. This is the maximum amount of energy available from aerobic metabolism. Aerobic metabolism is something that Ayla and I covered in a previous broadcast and a few different blog posts. So if you go to the YouTube channel, you can scroll down. It was one of our first Fitness Fridays, and we talk about what that metabolism would look like. And then anaerobic capacity is defined by the authors of this study as the maximum amount of energy available from anaerobic sources, or anaerobic metabolism. And again, if you want to know more, hey Ryan, if you want to know more about anaerobic and aerobic metabolism, you can go back to those old broadcasts from last year. So improving our aerobic capacity as well as our anaerobic capacity allows us to work harder, work faster, work longer. So it's something that we actually want to improve in terms of both aerobic and anaerobic capacity. All right, let's get to the steady state portion of this Tabata experiment. So in the steady state group, we had 7 male students who were young men, and most of them were physically active or part of a sports team. and I actually think that most of them, if not all, were on a sports team. The protocol was as follows. After a pre-test that determined their aerobic capacity and anaerobic capacity, participants exercised for 60 minutes, 5 days per week, for 6 weeks, so it was a longer term study, on a cycle ergometer, so a stationary bike, and they pedaled at a constant speed at 70% of their VO2 max, which is a moderate intensity. Okay, so that's what they were doing. Hey, Max. Now, after these 6 weeks of doing exercise 5 times a week at that certain intensity, which was steady state, moderate intensity, their aerobic capacity increased significantly, but their anaerobic capacity did not. So it still benefited them, but it didn't benefit the anaerobic capacity component. And I apologize if you can hear there's a lot of noise in the background. There's construction going on that wherever you go on campus, it's gonna be here, so I can't really get rid of it. All right, so bear with me. Now, the details of the HIT experiment, the high intensity interval training experiment. I'm not calling it Tabata yet because it's still just HIT. We'll get to that in a second. So the participants, again, were 7 young male students. Most were physically active and part of a sports team. Now, looking at the research, it doesn't necessarily specify in the study, but I'm led to believe that those were 7 different male participants because they had different weights and ages slightly. So the protocol, after a pre-test that determined their aerobic capacity and anaerobic capacity. Ayla, I have a question from you. How would percentage of VO2 max relate to the Myzone zones? That's a wonderful question, and you know what I'll actually go through and do? I have a little chart in my office, and I'll write in kind of the relative comparison between what VO2 max would look like and the Myzone zones, because there is a way to relate VO2 max to heart rate. That's a really good question, Ayla. Thank you. I'll do that later after this broadcast. All right, so after the 7 young male students in the HIT protocol did their initial testing of aerobic and anaerobic capacity, then they exercised for 5 days per week, again for 6 weeks, and again on a cycle ergometer. But here's what was different. On 4 of those 5 days per week, they performed exhaustive intermittent training with 7 to 8 20-second intervals. So they pushed really, really, really hard for 20 seconds, and they did that 7 to 8 times. Now, they had a 10-second recovery period in between each push. And this exercise, the push phase, was performed at about 170% of their VO2 max. That's supramaximal intensity, and I will definitely explain what that means in just a moment, because that can get confusing, because how can you do 170% of anything other than be awesome? You can't, right? So we have to go through and look at that. All right, now in between bouts of exercise, they took their 10-second recovery, and the 5th day of exercise, or the 5th session, was a steady state protocol, just like the other folks. It was, and not actually just like, because it was only 30 minutes of cycling at 70% of their VO2 max. So what they found with those folks who did the exhaustive intermittent exercise was that after the 6 weeks of training, participants' aerobic capacity improved significantly, by 23% in fact, and their anaerobic capacity increased significantly by 28%. So that's great, right? That was a great finding there. So they improved both their anaerobic and aerobic capacity. Now I want to just quickly clarify what I meant by 170% of VO2 max. That is again called supramaximal exercise, and the way that that's determined is that during a pre-test in which you're finding your VO2 max, so you're 100%, there is a work rate associated with that VO2 max, right? And so if we want to find someone's supramaximal intensity, if we want to select maybe 170% of their VO2 max, we would then look at that work rate and we would adjust the work rate up. So for example, if your VO2 max was reached when you were performing exercise at 200 watts, let's just say 200 watts, which is a very common measurement for workload during cycling, then we could really just look at a proportion. And if we looked at, you know, if 200 was your 100%, what would you get for 170 if you were looking at wanting to go above and beyond that VO2 max. And I've broken it down, a little equation. I don't think I'm going to explain it as clearly as it's written, so you can take a look at that. So really what they're doing is then performing exercise at higher watts, right? So it's not that their heart rate went above 100%, or necessarily even that their VO2 max or their VO2 went above their maximal level, although it certainly could have. It's that we're looking at the workload that was associated with what they got on their VO2 max test, and now we're bumping that up even higher, so they're performing exercise at an even higher workload than what was previously deemed to be their max. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, let me know and I will try to field it a little bit better. So what that means for us as exercisers then is that when we're trying to do Tabata, our goal is not to get to 120% of our maximal heart rate. That wouldn't work, right? If you're a Myzone user, you know that if you get to 100% and hold it there for 10 seconds or longer, Myzone is automatically going to bump up your max in the system. So it wouldn't work like that, right? But what we can take away from this is that we'd be working at a really high intensity. If we got to 100%, we probably wouldn't be able to hold it for very long, or Myzone would bump it up. So the goal here is not to get to 100% of our maximal heart rate. All right, so the takeaways from the Tabata study. The authors of the study provided several conclusions, including the ones that I'll share with you now. Aerobic training does not change anaerobic capacity. That makes sense. We've talked about the principle of specificity before, and so if we're training for aerobic purposes, then most likely we're going to see benefits aerobically, but not benefits anaerobically. High intensity intermittent training though, and this was the 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off Tabata protocol, it is a very effective way to increase not only aerobic capacity, but also anaerobic capacity. So it's really like a 2-for-1, if you will, right? So takeaways for the general exerciser, and I like that, Coach B, 100% is dead. Not necessarily, but 100% would be really, really hard to get to. All right, so should we be doing Tabata workouts all the time? Maybe not, but let's explore this a little bit. Some points that I want to make are that true Tabata is probably not tolerable for most individuals, right? The participants in this study were young male athletes, right? And I believe that most of them were in their early 20s, although I can check on that as well. They performed exercise to exhaustion, so they physically couldn't do more than 8 bouts of exercise for those 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off. They couldn't do more than 8. I would imagine that most exercisers would probably not want to do that. I don't know about you, but thumbs up if you're like, maybe not going all the way to exhaustion. The second point is that true Tabata is not going to be measurable for most of us unless you have access to the technology that would allow you to measure your watts. Exactly. Measure your watts and measure your VO2. Because I know for me, I don't know what percentage of my VO2 max I've reached during my last cardio workout. I just don't know. I don't have the measurement tools in front of me. But what we can take away though is that it's very high in intensity, and we can take away this 2-to-1 ratio of work to rest. So we can look at this as 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off, and that's a fun protocol. It's effective, it's fun, it's high intensity, but it's short. That's something that we can take away from this. So my advice to you guys is, if you like doing the 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off, do it, right? You can make it high intensity, you can make it moderate intensity. You're still following the same time intervals that were used by the Tabata study, but are we truly performing Tabata in the way that it originated? No, but I think that that's okay. So as Myzone users, when we're using our Myzone heart rate monitor, we can benefit from the 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off, and we can measure that because, of course, up on the screen we can see the timer and we can see how our heart is responding to exercise. So I recommend that you aim for the yellow and or the red zone during the work phase for those 20 seconds, and then try to recover as much as you possibly can during the 10 seconds. Before this, and kind of in honor of this broadcast, I did a little Tabata. I was doing ball slams and a couple different types. And your heart rate's gonna stay up during those 10 seconds. It might recover a little tiny bit, but it's gonna stay up pretty high. So when you're looking back at your activity log for the day, then you might see almost like a straight line or even like a little bit of movement, but unfortunately you're probably not going to see big dips in heart rate. Yeah, and Coach B, I like that. Play red light, green light, red light, green light. You can do that too, most likely, and what I think you mean by that is that you are picking a zone to recover down to, and once you've gotten to that zone you can push again, or vice versa. You get up into a certain zone and once you've gotten there you can recover. Totally cool. I think that's an awesome way to do that, and we do have a couple games like that on the myzone.org blog. However, because of the nature of the short rest periods of Tabata, we probably aren't going to see much of a decrease in our heart rate during those 10 seconds. So you might have to extend the recovery periods. All right, and also since Tabata is a form of high intensity interval training and it can be very intense, I recommend that you perform this no more than 2 to 3 days a week maximum. And so I really do recommend folks that you start out, if you're not used to this form of training, doing 1 day per week and then work your way up. Make sure that you warm up, make sure that you cool down, and make sure that you're also performing lower intensity forms of exercise on other days of the week. So as we always like to say, your activity calendar should be very colorful, just like the Myzone zones, right? Make sure that you're getting all of those zones in there. So that is Tabata. I would love to know what you're doing for Tabata. So when you post to social media, be sure to use the hashtags MyZoneMoves and effort rewarded so we can go through and see everybody. Hey Andy, we can go through and see everybody doing their Tabata workouts. Again, that's 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off for 8 rounds. It's intense, but it's quick and it's really fun and effective. I hope you guys have enjoyed this broadcast. If you do have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below. I'll go back through, and there are a few things I'm going to add to the comment section, so you can stay tuned for that for a little bit more information. If you have requests on future topics, Ayla and I would love to know what those are. Hey Charlotte. Yes, it's used in spin and hit classes. Love it. Me too. So you can always put in requests in the comment section below, and we want to really make sure that we are speaking to what you want to learn. So let us know what that is. As always, you can learn more about Myzone by checking out myzone.org and checking out Myzone all over social media. We will see you next week. Ayla will be back, and we will bring you another great broadcast. Thanks, Nicole. I was thinking of you through a lot of this. Nicole and I did grad school together. All right, guys, I will see you next week, and as always, keep moving forward. Bye.